Plain and simple, the team that we root for today wouldn't be here were it not for Howard Baldwin. The team's history reflects that of the man we honor today. The Whalers and Baldwin, Baldwin and the Whalers. He was always there. The roof fell in on our building. A disaster. Howard had us traveling up Route 91 to Springfield just hours later for a Whaler game. Howard Baldwin loved the World Hockey Association. He became its president. But he wanted more for his team. He wanted more for his adopted city. He wanted the NHL. It was a tough sell. He negotiated for years, failing twice before finally becoming a member.
I think that a hell of a lot was accomplished because a lot of the emotional differences, a lot of the dislikes, or however you want to put it, was broken down over the past few days. I think that they have come away with a lot of respect for us. And I must say, I quite frankly have come away with a lot more respect for them.
That was in June of 1978. By March of 1979, the Whalers and 3 other teams from the World Hockey Association were big time.
On behalf of the Board of Governors of the National Hockey League, I'm very pleased to be able to report to you today that the board has approved the National Hockey League's 5th plan of expansion.
Tell us your innermost thoughts.
Well, I am very happy, because we've worked long and hard on it, the partnership has, and I'm really happy for my partners and the people in Hartford, for people like yourself. I think there's no question that it takes our sport and our franchise and puts it right where it belongs, and getting it right back up there is number one.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Hello. How are you, everybody? My name is Tim Hanlon, and it's Good Seats Still Available. Yeah, it's the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. We do it every week for you, and we thank you for coming on by. Welcome to the proceedings. Lots of fun and frivolity ahead for you this week as our guest. In that clip that you just heard, the voice of our returning guest. His name is Howard Baldwin, and you hockey fans, especially you New England / Hartford Whalers memorialists, will absolutely know that name. And if you haven't listened to our first episode with Mr. Baldwin, almost 2 years ago now, our episode number 100, by all means, give a listen to that, because we get into the Whalers story, both WHA and segue into the NHL. But we've been dying to have Howard back to go even further in his life and career, which is going very strong still, thank you very much, in the realm of film production. You may remember, for example, the Tyler Hackford directed and Howard Baldwin and family produced biopic Ray from 2004, Academy Award winning Ray. As a matter of fact, Jamie Foxx with his outstanding performance in that film. That's his new career, Howard's, but we drag him back, kicking and screaming, into, let's call it part 2 or chapter 3 or whatever, of the story of his career outside and beyond, or after the Whalers. And it's fascinating, and it's nonstop, and we get into all that stuff. Yeah, we touch on the Whalers story and the WHA. Of course, that's obviously very important. That's where Howard got his start in earnest, and obviously that coincides with lots of other explorations we've done, both of the WHA, various teams. Our late, great departed friend Dennis Murphy, the chief instigator of said league, and others, obviously, that came afterwards, or before as well, the ABA, et cetera. But we get into lots of fun stuff that sort of emanated out of, I guess, or became sort of the second or third or fourth acts of Howard Baldwin's just amazing career. You, of course, remember that Howard came up with a book, an autobiographical account of lots of these things called Slim and None, and you'll find a convenient link to that book, of course, on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just find this episode number, 259 now? My goodness. And you'll find a convenient link to that, as well as a whole bunch of other stuff. And he's also got a podcast out, Slim and None, which is a beautiful, parallel or addition, if you will, to the story. And that's found wherever good podcasts are found as well. But we get into some of the other crazy lives, if you will, of Howard. For example, the clip that you sort of heard there from, that was Dave Smith from Hartford's TV station WFSB back in 1990 when Howard was being inducted into the Hartford Whalers Hall of Fame. And in the midst of that, you heard not only Dave Smith's voice and Howard's voice, but also the voice of one somewhat taciturn and very measured. I think it's the best way I could describe it. John Ziegler of the NHL, and I know nothing about Mr. Ziegler as a person, and but his facade, I guess, was very sort of stone-faced and perhaps indicative of the very tense and at times it seems acrimonious conversations between this almost decade-long thorn in the side, this WHA thing, against that of the NHL. And Howard Baldwin is the, I don't know if it's the unsung hero, but I think for some people it's sort of glossed over as essentially the person that truly made, you want to call it a merger, the NHL would probably like to call it an expansion, whatever those four teams that came over from the WHA. And I'm sorry for the Houston Aeros and the Cincinnati Stingers for not making that jump. And we talk about that with Howard in our conversation. That's, June 1978 was sort of when it was kind of coming together. And in March of 79, the quote unquote expansion from the NHL's terms. And again, they were the surviving entity, if you will. So I guess they could call it what they wanted. But, I think to most hockey aficionados, it was a merger, and it was arguably a successful conclusion to a wild and woolly almost 10 years or so of challenging the man. And that man, literally and figuratively, was John Ziegler and the NHL. And it needed challenging. And we've talked about a lot of sort of expansion efforts or lack thereof until 1967 or 68 when the NHL kind of woke up and realized that, there could be more to this hockey thing on the professional level in this country beyond just 6 friggin' teams. And that WHA story it's fascinating. So we talk about that in this week's episode with Howard. We talk about his NHL career with the Pittsburgh Penguins. There's the Minnesota North Stars in the mix, the founding of the San Jose Sharks, and the interconnection between all of those three teams, which is convoluted and confusing, but we try to get some clarity there. We talk about the similarly bizarre and intriguing story also of the Red Army team out of the then Soviet Union. Essentially, the Red Army team is the nickname. It's also referred to, I guess, historically as the Central Red Army team. I think the official name is HC. I think that stands for Hockey Club CSKA Moscow, which was and is still the Russian professional hockey club. I believe it's part of the Continental Hockey League now, the Russian league, the KHL. But back in the day, I think this is sometime in the 90s, when Howard and friends were part of the Pittsburgh Penguins ownership. There was we'll get into it, but it's an investment and or co-marketing relationship or something in between those two or both of, where there was a relationship, if you will, between the Penguins and or by extension the NHL and this Red Army team. And it almost became sort of a spectacle. I wouldn't call it quite Harlem Globetrotters-esque, but there were certainly elements of that, barnstorming and bringing pizzazz to the team, although this was a team very much ensconced in the professional and even before that amateur hockey scene in Russia, but / Soviet Union at the time. The movie that you should see as preparation for this is called Red Penguins. And Howard and various other people are prime figures in that film. Howard had nothing to do with the production of it, but obviously he's a main character, and I mean that in the nicest terms, hardly pejoratively. Red Penguins, it came out in 2020. We'll have a link to that too. But the story of that is equally intriguing, but as is some of the other stuff of Howard's career. We get into some of his minor league hockey exploits, including going back to Hartford and bringing back the Whaler name by renaming the Rangers AHL club at the time, the Hartford Wolfpack, to the Connecticut Whale, the ongoing legacy of that name, continuing in the women's league, now known as the Premier Hockey League. What is it called now? Obviously, it used to be called the National Women's Hockey League. What do we call it now? I think it's now known as, oh my goodness, Premier Hockey Federation. I need to get that straight. The Premier Hockey Federation. And that name and logo and all that still lives on. We get into the ongoing usage of the Hartford Whalers logo and team name and all that kind of stuff by the Carolina Hurricanes, the good, the bad, and the ugly of that. And yes, wait for it, we get into Howard's dalliance, I think it's best called that, with the fledgling World Football League back in 1974. It didn't sort of come to consummation, but Howard was involved very much behind the scenes. But some interesting World Football League insights there too. All of that and more coming up with a fun and frankly overdue return conversation with our pal Howard Baldwin coming up in a few moments' time. Quick promotional note before let's go to our friends at RoyalRetros.com, the king of throwbacks they are. It's RoyalRetros.com. And the best way to explore them this week is to simply just click on their collections subheading and then further click to the WHA collection. And I don't really need to tell you much more than you're just going to get everything you want and ever needed and hoped for in terms of memories in clothing form from the old World Hockey Association. Yeah, shirts with the logos and different colors and schema. That's terrific. But also handcrafted 503 Sports branded and customizable jerseys. Affordably priced, well made. And, if you're looking for a Nordiques jersey, for example, you want it in that baby blue with the fleur de lis all over the place. Great. Would you like it in the red, white, and blue sort of version? Either way, you can get it. And I think there's even a third version as well. Get your name on the back of it if you like. And that's kind of what you're going to get at RoyalRetros.com. You want that Chicago Cougars jersey in either green sort of dominated or yellow dominated. You can get it. Of course, there's the Whalers stuff, but you can get the Cleveland Crusaders jersey in either white dominant form or in that their gorgeous deep royal purple with that sort of smart looking Crusaders logo. The Cincinnati Stingers. I mean, you name the team, the Birmingham Bulls, the Toronto Toros, the Vancouver Blazers, or the Philadelphia version thereof beforehand, the Roadrunners of Phoenix. I mean, they're all there. Yeah, even the Calgary Cowboys are in there. And again, you'll find them all. The great, not only shirts, but again, these smart-looking jerseys. You'll be the king of the block with your hockey friends with these great throwback jerseys from RoyalRetros.com. And don't forget, promo code for you there on the website for 10% off all of your purchases. It's SEATS, SEATS, SEATS. That's the promo code for 10% off all of your purchases at RoyalRetros.com. Check them out. You'll be glad you did. I know it. And we thank Dustin and his friends out in Portland for their sponsorship of the show. All right, let's get to it. Howard Baldwin returns. Here's our fun and no-holds-barred conversation. He's a delight to talk to. I think we may have him back again. That's how good this conversation is. I hope you enjoy it and as much as I did making it. And here it is. Please, as always, enjoy. So it's been, my goodness, a couple of years since we last talked. I'm sure you remember it intently and with great specificity.
Yep.
Yeah, right. Okay. But since we've last talked, and I obviously saw your quotes in that great article in ESPN.com. We were talking to Ryan actually this weekend about it. It's been, unfortunately, Dennis Murphy has passed since we last talked. And I thought maybe we just jump in with some memories there, given that he was probably the guy who hooked you in big time into the WHA and all the other things that came from that.
Yeah, I mean, Dennis was a wonderful guy and a great salesman, gregarious, Just a gregarious Irish fellow with great humor and spirit. And he led a great life and made huge contributions to sport, and obviously will be missed, but he led a full, wonderful life and was a wonderful man.
Well, remind us from your Whalers exploits and stuff. How did you come to know him? And was he the guy, the chief instigator for getting you involved in the WHA in the first place?
Yeah, Tim, he was, because when we called out here to Southern California, he was the guy that answered the phone. And he was a guy in the article that we saw. So he was our first line of communication. And really, until the first meeting, we spoke almost 100% to him, occasionally to the lawyer, Don Reagan, and occasionally to Gary Davidson, but mostly Dennis.
And he was, if from my recollection of our conversations with him, his tone seemed to be kind of like hustle first, fill in the details later. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, he would create a beautiful package, and you never quite knew what was in it. He was constantly selling, constantly adjusting. I don't think I ever saw him discouraged or deterred. And you could get bad news, and there was plenty of up and down news in the WHA. But he would always rebound and say, well, okay, that's the dark side, but here's the bright side. We're losing this owner, but we're getting a new owner. And we lost this player, but look who we're going to get, So he was a master of having a constant positive spirit, like few I've ever seen, because it's a business where you can get pretty, discouraged at times. There are a lot of disappointments. And I don't know that I ever remember seeing Dennis disappointed or discouraged, maybe disappointed, but not discouraged.
Well, especially when you're challenging forces bigger and more entrenched and more historical than you. And frankly, when there's probably no rule book per se in doing that.
Well, you're right about the rule book. I mean, we had nothing to compare it to. What we were doing was the first, certainly for me and my partners, because we were mighty young, and so there was nothing we could compare it to. But look, when you start a new league in a sport like the NHL, there's no way to compare it to anything. You're flying by the seat of your pants from everything you do, including putting the team together. I mean, we've been doing this podcast ourselves, and we talk with some of the players, and we talk with Ronnie Ryan, who helped put the team together. And he said, we had no idea. Would our team be good? Would it be able to compete? We think we're drafting good players, and we think we're going to be able to compete, but we had nothing to gauge it by. And I'd never thought of it that way, but he's right. Was right and is right.
So why did you sign up, and what was his effect and others' effect on you in convincing you to do so? You were relatively young and early in your quote unquote career, but if I remember correctly, that quote unquote career wasn't even fully formed at that point in your head, right? Yet?
Yeah, it was not formed. Obviously, I was 28. I had about 4 or 5 years of working experience with the Flyers and with their minor league team. So we were in our uncharted territory pretty much no matter what I did. So we were in from the get-go. We thought it was a great challenge. We smelled an opportunity. We smelled the challenge, and we just went for it.
Did you worry about repercussions given your experience in the NHL and knowing, frankly, how much of a vice-like grip they really had on the sport? I mean, to the point where, as you probably remember, right, there were only 6 teams in that league until the late 60s. I mean, they probably held out longest, I guess, in terms of, expansion and seeing other markets and growing the sport.
Yeah, I never personally worried about, I guess the word is retribution, because for me, there wasn't a huge downside. I didn't have a long career in the NHL, and I had a long life, God willing, in front of me. But for the players, I just admire the players that made that leap of faith. I admire them so much. Sure, some of them, it was a step, not sideways, but always a step up. But some of the players, a lot of the players we signed and other teams signed really had their future in front of them in the NHL. And a lot of those NHL owners were mean people, vindictive people. And they weren't going to let you back if the league folded. So there was a hell of a lot at stake, believe me.
So what was it, and maybe how much of it was you needing to be coaxed to do so, or how much of it was sort of latent inside you and it just needed to be kind of tapped and gently cracked open, so to speak, by, say, somebody so gregarious and optimistic like a Dennis Murphy or even a Gary Davidson? How much entrepreneurialism would you say that you had in you, to kind of just jump in and do this, right? Because some people say, like when they're starting their career, they become a stand-up comedian or whatever it might be, is they're almost thankful that they don't know what they don't know, right? It gives them fearlessness. Was that kind of where you were coming from in this, or did you have to be sort of convinced, given your early years in the NHL and all its formality?
A very good question, Tim. There was no fear because we didn't know enough to have fear. And I never had to be coaxed because we wanted this from the time we had our first conversation with Dennis. My partner, Johnny Coburn, and I just said, this is our opportunity to do our thing. And if anything, we were nervous maybe they wouldn't take us in because they were pretty good at the hustle and made it sound like they had a long line of applicants when in fact they were digging for applicants. So we kind of hustled each other. But at the end of the day, it worked out great. But we wanted in from day one. We were focused on making it work.
Why do you think they went so hard on hockey? The ABA certainly had been, Dennis's, shot across the bow, so to speak. And, it had made some initial waves, but clearly that wasn't sort of, the epitome of long-term and rooted success there. Did you have any, inkling about sort of the ABA and why maybe hockey was next? I mean, did you think that was going to be a blueprint maybe for success, or did the ABA figure into any of your calculations?
No, but we knew they had started, and the ABA was going on. Remember, when they started the WHA, the ABA was in full stride. Now, what happens when you start a new league, if you read the books and all, but what happens is entrepreneurs like Gary and Dennis start it. But the minute the league is formed, that day that the 12 people sit around the room and hand over their checks, and the league entrepreneurs accept them, then the power is in the hands of those 12 franchise members. And then there's accountability. And the league is no longer theirs, quote unquote. It's the 12 members that sit around that room. So once you get 12 businessmen that have their own set of goals and their own agendas and their own financial needs, you're going to have a tremendous amount of infighting and disagreements. And I've said, even to my last year in the NHL, a league is a partner designed to compete against itself. You sit in a room and you have the spirit of cooperation. Oh, we're going to do this salary cap. And I mean, you walk out of that room and you're only out for one thing, and that's your team. And if anybody says different, they're full of it. And so what can often happen is the league office bears the brunt of some blame that probably should fall more on the shoulders of the owners. So for Gary and Dennis, Gary wasn't in the ABA long at all. Dennis was in a little bit longer. But then the league got taken over by other powers to be. And so they then formed the WHA, and of course they learned, so they put more teeth into their their operating power, if you get what I mean. And so they lasted. Dennis lasted quite a bit longer. Gary left fairly quickly, not because he had to leave, but because he wanted to leave to do the World Football League.
All right, we'll get to that one in a second. But could one? So I guess when it came to the WHA, right? So maybe I'll just pull on that thread for a second. Was there any discussion, thought, whatever, of the owners, or maybe even in your thinking as you were thinking about getting the coin purse together and seeing how much money you could get to get your own franchise, about anything related to or hinting at some kind of centralized ownership, by sort of what we call today sort of the single entity sort of theory?
Single entity ownership? No, absolutely not. It was totally alien at the time. Totally. And that really didn't happen until, Game Plan, my dear friend Bob Caparel and Randy Vitaha had a company.
But there was some communal aspects, though, right? I mean, the idea of going after some of these top name NHL players with these big, literally and figuratively, checks, where it was sort of a shared wealth or shared sacrifice kind of thing, right?
It was only one, Bobby Hull.
Okay.
Only one. And you're 100% right, though. Everybody, including myself, felt this would be very valuable to get a guy like Hull. And so everybody was meant to chip in. Only about 4 teams did. We were one that did chip in. But that signing pretty much put the icing on the cake of the league.
Wait, so people were reneging already? I mean, didn't that give you some pause?
Oh, sure. Oh, my God. We got in the league in November of 1971. April of 1972, there were already 4 franchise moves, 4 cities from one to another, and I think 4 or 5 ownership changes. I would always say right up until the last day, right the day we officially did the merger, that every league meeting was like Russian roulette, and you spin the pistol and you see who's in and who's out.
And you started to worry when? For the first time?
I
mean, I know you're fearless and the story, and you
no, but as you get older and you have partners and you have a responsibility to them, I always felt that we'd hold the league together. So I never really worried that the league would crater. Right at the end, when we did the merger, if we didn't consummate the merger in 79, I don't know that we could have gotten another year, because we were then down to 6 teams, and 6 teams playing 78 games. That's a lot, isn't it?
Well, let's slide into that, because that's kind of where we left off in our last conversation. I don't, depending on whose history you read and what sort of narratives you sort of believe. I mean, I guess my terminology would be you were almost like, if not actually, the invisible hand behind that merger, quote unquote. Would you agree? I mean, you're kind of like an outsized figure that it wouldn't necessarily, I mean, in certain circles is crucial to that merger, and in others you were kind of, sort of the quiet guiding force behind it.
Well, and I appreciate that, Tim. I mean, I was there from day one, and I was blessed to have a very strong ownership group. Our market was small, but the ownership group was probably the most powerful in either league, with the Connecticut corporations and United Technologies and a few banks. I mean, you put all those assets together, it was probably about $100 billion. And so we had that power. And I had been in from day one, and I knew instinctively that we were not going to make it long term unless we did some kind of a merger. And I had allies. I mean, Billy DeWitt was a huge ally. He owns the St. Louis Cardinals now. He was very strong with it. Mike Obati in Winnipeg, Pocklington and Edmonton. The strong franchises knew that if they wanted to stay in business, we had to do a merger. And at the time, from 70, I guess it was 77, 76 on, I was president of the WHA, as well as the managing general partner of the Whalers. So I kind of had the dual job, and it wasn't, I'm not trying to say it was terribly complicated, because really my function was to get the merger done, not day to day run the league.
You're almost the most equal of equals, so to speak, right? Who better probably to kind of lead somebody who's in our shoes, but also can collectively look at our total lot going forward.
Yeah, and had relationship with, I mean, I had a great relationship with Ed Snyder from the Flyers, and had spent time, even though we were in two leagues, getting to know some of the other guys. And so that's really what pulls people together, is them realizing, hey, they're not bad people. We're not bad people. The time for the nonsense has got to end. And the element that is opposing it, and there was an element, we know who they were, Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal for a good stretch, Boston. You had to overcome them and really work hard at doing that. Chicago, and we did it.
When would you say you were, shall we say, full tilt on focusing on the merger, right? The rumors had started quite early on in the WHA's history, but obviously didn't get consummated until 79. It just seems, if memory serves, frankly, from when I was growing up, it almost seemed it seemed forever. It was lingering in the air that this was somehow going to happen, whether it was a merger or an absorption or something. Yeah, it seems like almost as early as 76, 75 even, maybe, right?
Nah, there was always sort of in the air, but not real. It got real in 78 when they made the change to John Ziegler and
the NHL. Yeah.
Sorry. And that's when it got real. And we actually then, people don't remember, June of 78, we were actually voted in a 16 division with Houston and Cincinnati. And then the Ballards and the Bostons and a couple other franchises rallied the negatives, and we voted out in August. So, but we had that experience, and John, one of the things John Ziegler said to me right away was, look, and then Bill Wirtz came over to our side of the line and trying to help make it happen. He said, one thing to do, because we're all scared to death of litigation, antitrust, hire the firm Proskauer gets, the law firm, a huge law firm in New York City. And we did. You know who our lawyer was? David Stern. He was our first lawyer to represent us.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And David lasted 3 or 4 months and then went right over to the NBA to become legal counsel under Larry O'Brien. But they then put on our case a fellow named Michael Cardoza, who was a marvelous guy. And so it went from there. And we had another crack at it the following June, came closer. Then the fall came wicked close. And then within a couple of months, we got it done.
Who would you say was more the driving force? The shall we say, increasingly desperate, perhaps, WHA ownership group, or the NHL because of those potential legal issues, and or maybe a desire to continue to fuel the catch up, if you will, of their slow but evolving expansion thing that finally started to happen in the late 60s?
Well, there are a couple of things, way to look at this. Okay, the driving force was both sides, really, because if we went out of business, you could argue legally they were way out there, because you could say they put us out of business. So the best of all worlds, if you have a terminal disease and somebody comes along and says, I'm going to cure that disease and I'm going to pay you X amount of dollars. You get what I mean? And that's what happened between WHA. The NHL realized, my God, we can get rid of this WHA, which is causing us great pain, and we'll get them to pay us whatever the price was, $4 million a team, right? And so it was a win-win for them. And then, of course, took them completely off the hook in the event that we ended up folding. and then accuse them of putting us out of business. You see what I mean, Tim? You see?
Yeah,
So,
sure.
yeah.
Well, here's the other. That's very. So let me then get into the actual teams. I mean, you mentioned Houston and Cincinnati falling by the wayside, but Houston. All right, so I'm guessing you said around 78, 77 ish. It was getting more real and putting
right.
more flesh around it, right? So, can you give our audience a bit of a sense of sort of the I want to call it haggling, but the decision making around which markets were gonna go and ultimately did go, right? Because Houston obviously didn't even make it to the final year of the WHA, but clearly a market of interest, right? Cincinnati and Birmingham, which were there at the end of the end of the last season, ultimately didn't make it either. And I'm just curious as to maybe some rationale that you might remember for the ultimate decisions that were made.
Okay. They actually initially were okay with Cincy and Houston, and then because remember, we got voted in June and then got voted out. Houston
it would seem those markets would be very attractive, even today, frankly, certainly Houston today, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. But truthfully, I don't think deep down they didn't want any of this. They didn't really want Hartford, but they knew the one team that was powerful financially and had we had done a pretty good job was Hartford. And your three Canadian markets were outstanding markets. And even though there isn't a team in Quebec, there should be. It was just a great market. And Winnipeg has proven itself. Edmonton's proven itself. So they really took three Canadian teams and only one American team, which was Hartford. And then with Cincy, they just didn't want Cincy. They just didn't like the market. It was their rationale. I really, to this day, don't get it. I kind of do get Birmingham. They weren't ready for going deep into the South like that, even though I like Birmingham as a market. Johnny Bassett, fabulous owner.
Legendary for sure. For
oh my God, they don't come any better anywhere in any league in any sport than John. So both Johnny and Billy, when they realized they weren't going to get in, they hung in there with us because they realized if they're ever going to get a payoff, it would be from the payoff of not getting in, and that's what happened.
And once it all sort of went down and you essentially, I guess, went back to sort of essentially, quote unquote, just being an owner and operator for the now Hartford named franchise, for having it been New England, or had the name Hartford already occurred in WHA land? I think maybe it did for a year or two. You kept New England for a while.
No, we
just
did
the
not.
First year.
No, when the minute we got into and we did the merger, the corporate partners said, okay, now we put up a whole ton more money and we want to really brand this team as a Hartford team. Yep. And they were 100% correct. And that's what we did. And if you look at the logo says it all.
No, well, it still says it all, right? As you well know, and probably more than anybody, right? It outsells some of the lesser current teams in the NHL, that logo, to the extent that the Hurricanes will allow it.
No.
By the way, since we mentioned the Hurricanes, let's bring that topic up because it's sore depending on who you're asking, from Hartford days or even Carolina days and stuff. How do you feel about their on again, off again, and I guess again, on again, embrace of the Hartford Whalers franchise logo and all?
There's one reason why they do it, Tim. One, money.
Cashola. Yeah.
Sure, they woke up to the fact, hey, maybe that logo's pretty good. Maybe we have some rights to it. That's between them and the NHL. But other than that, look, it's not up to me. And it's up to, the league itself and Carolina. And they've decided to embrace Hartford finally. I don't think they even know I exist, and I could care less. My days ended when they ended. I still love Hartford, and I love the marketplace, and I love each and every person that we worked with and played for us. Once it left, that was that. But
okay, so that's a very politically correct and polite answer, right? But I mean, still, right? I mean, your blood, your guts, your spirit, your entrepreneurialism, all of it, right, predates all of the, I don't know, and frankly, a whole generation, maybe even two, of Connecticut hockey fans that grew up watching Whalers games, or at least heard stories about them afterwards.
You're completely right, but I feel they've been very convenient the way everything has a birth, and the birth of Carolina was not in Carolina. The birth of Carolina was in Boston, and then went to Hartford, where it had a wonderful life until it moved to Carolina. Well, the history from 1999 past doesn't exist to those guys. So the only history that matters to them is the Carolina forward. And I do think that's too bad, but that's not my decision. I wouldn't do it that way, but it's up to them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are some apologists there that kind of look at it and say, well, at least they're embracing and they wear the colors once a game or two during a season and all that stuff. But, frankly, from a more cynical and frankly, I think more honest and straightforward approach, right? It's an appropriation and it's convenient, it seems, right? Because of what you mentioned before, the cash involved. And it just, while that's not bad, I mean, there are others who say, at least the history is being remembered, right? Which is not the case in a lot of other team situations. We'll get to one in a minute. Not only in hockey, but elsewhere, right? And it's kind of a weird reason why we kind of keep chipping away at this for this silly little podcast. But it's part of history, right? And you hate to see it whitewashed or worse, forgotten. And I guess it's better than no memories whatsoever. But, the cynicism creeps in, though, as to the reasons why. And I think that maybe injures people's feelings, especially those who are involved.
I would agree with you. I'm happy that they are now starting to acknowledge it, because it never should be forgotten. And I hope maybe one day they'll play some exhibition games up in Hartford, and maybe even a regular season game or two. And I know that's a lot harder in today's economics, but there's a great history there, and I just hope they'll embrace it more, not less.
All right, what's this? LinkedIn Jobs. Hey, these days it can be hard to find and hire the right candidates for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs made it easier to find the people that you want to talk to faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs to reach your network and beyond to the world's largest professional network of over 770 million people. My goodness. Focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, and use screening questions to get your role in front of only the most qualified. Then use the simple tools on LinkedIn Jobs to quickly filter and prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. Yes, it's no surprise, friends, that LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates that you want to talk to faster. Of course. Well, did you know that every week that nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn? Come on. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/goodseats. That's linkedin.com/goodseats to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. And now back to our conversation. All right, we'll get back to the NHL and hockey in a minute, but around this time, I can't ignore this, and this is, to me, is one of those things that I really wanted to get to with you today, is that World Football League. Shall we call it a dalliance? Because you were in the mix in the beginning, it seems, from what I understand, but ultimately didn't pull the trigger on the WFL. Do you want to kind of give us some storyline about what could have been the Boston franchise in the WFL?
I'll tell you exactly what went on. Gary formed the league, and he gave me an opportunity to get in it, and I took it. This was now the second year of the Whalers, and I knew I was moving the team to Hartford. And here I am starting a team in Boston, and I was in way over my head. I said, look, at this point I'm like 31, I guess 30. There's no way I could do both and be fair to the Hartford situation, which was my love and commitment. So I quickly realized, Howard, you are in over your head. Be proactive and get out. I had actually hired a coach, a really great old NFL legend, Babe Parilli, and I hired the first female general manager ever in pro sports, in Dusty Rhodes. And so when I realized, I went to Bob Schmertz, who was my partner in the Whalers, and he had a team in New York, and he needed a front office. He was sort of floundering, and I said, Bob, why don't you take my front office, and Gary will sell Boston team to somebody else, and then you have a semblance of a staff here, and I'll try to help you, but I got to focus on doing the right thing for Hartford, and that's exactly what happened.
Did you have any qualms about the WFL or its premise relative, say, for what you experienced with the WHA or saw through Dennis and Gary from their initial success with the ABA, or was it just literally just kind of refocusing your efforts? Because the NFL is a different ball of wax, right? To go
yeah,
after.
But I never thought of that. I thought that Gary could make it work. Dennis wasn't involved in the WFL. But it was Gary's show, and there were some good owners. His initial group of owners were really good. And you figured, okay, Nick Letty, Bob Schmertz, John Bassett, this fella in Chicago, I didn't know who he was, but they seemed to have a good base of ownership. And it seemed to me they had a good chance. And I can tell you, I knew nothing about the football rules.
Well, it also
marketing and sales and all that, which carries over to all sports, but I didn't know anything about football, and I never particularly enjoyed it the way I enjoyed hockey.
Yeah, well, that matters, right? For sure, because if it doesn't align with your passions and frankly, what you had to do to kind of go that extra mile, right? I'm sure there were plenty of times, plenty of moments, plenty of late nights, and waking up in middle of nights, being an owner in the WHA and a franchise and the future and all that kind of stuff, let alone having to do it for another league and another team. But, it also, though, I mean, you rewind it in the time, and this article certainly pulled it out, and all of our explorations of the WFL, right? I mean, there's certainly no bigger target at that time, of course, than the NFL, especially with what happened with the ABA and the WHA going after the man, if you will, in each of those sports, right? It only seemed logical that the NFL should be next and maybe the biggest prize, but of course it didn't really pan out that way.
Didn't quite pan out.
That said, one last sort of question around that. I mean, you obviously must have been aware enough of it. I mean, did you see let's call it the disaster that was coming for that thing, or were you just not?
Well, sorry, Tim. Here's why I did, because I said to Bob Schmertz, look, I'll help you in the New York Stars. I'll help with the front office. I'll come down. It was so easy to go to New York a day or day and a half a week, which I did. And Bob started to have financial issues, okay? And so Bob said, Howard, once it turned, and what turned the WFL, they started out like a house fire. Then the franchise in Philly had a crowd of 60,000, and somebody admitted that 55,000 were giveaways, okay? So that eroded immediately the credibility of the league. And it never took in New York. They were playing, the New York Stars were playing at a place called, I think it was Roosevelt Field, which is
Downing Stadium on Randall's Island. Yeah,
Randall's Island.
Before you go further on that, I mean, maybe you have some inside knowledge. We literally just did an episode last week about, or this week actually, as we're recording this, Shea Stadium. Was Shea Yankee Stadium was kind of going offline at that point. Was Shea or any other facility that you were aware of in the mix? It had to be, because that was always everybody's third choice. The Cosmos obviously had to play there too.
Nobody wanted the team. I mean, Bob, I know he tried, but he just felt the only place they could play it was Randall's Island.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he started playing there, and it wasn't drawing well. And he said to me, Howard, you got to help me get out of this, And there was a guy you may have heard of, a famous Broadway producer named David Merrick. You ever heard of that name?
My goodness.
And he produced, you look him up after Hello, Dolly. He was a famous guy.
Of course. So legendary, of course.
Yeah. So I got along great with the guy. He loved football. And there's that famous restaurant, whatever the heck it is, Sardi's or one of those, in the Theater Row in New York City. And once a week I'd have lunch with him to get him to try to make an offer to Schmertz. And so he said, Howard, I'm going to make an offer to him. And he did. He offered him $4 million, but he insisted on all the money going into the team. So he said, I'll commit to putting up $4 million and I'll give Bob some kind of a carried interest. But, the money's got to stay in the team. This is not going to be easy to turn on. I thought it was one hell of a deal. It got Bob completely off the hook. And I went to Bob with it, and Bob said, no, that's not fair. I want half the money to go into my pocket. So, of course, I had to tell David Merrick, here's the deal. He just looked at me and he said, you tell him blankety blank, blank, blank. I said, okay.
Did you repeat it word for word?
Yeah. And so within 3 weeks, Bob said to me, see if you can get David Merrick back at the table. And I said, geez, Bob, I haven't done a lot of this. I'll try, but I think he's pretty committed not to be committed. And I remember calling David up. He had a secretary, I think had been with him for 100 years. And she said, oh, David always loves his lunches with you, Howard, but don't even bring up the name of the New York Stars. He doesn't even want to hear the name. So that ended that. And we ended up, actually, I got him Upton Bell, great guy, the son of Bert Bell. You saw him in the article. To this day,
yes, we had it. We had him on a couple of years ago as well. Fantastic stories about that, and the whole Charlotte thing is just fascinating.
Yeah, he's a fun guy. He's just a great guy. Great guy.
Well, so okay, but last part on the WFL then. So you obviously had a relationship, and still to this day, I guess, still do with Gary Davidson, a white whale, if there ever was one. We want to get wink, wink, nod, nod. Were you helping him at all in any of this? Was he reaching out for your help, perhaps behind the scenes for the league too?
I really, once he did the WFL, once I dropped out, Gary and I really lost touch until about 5 years ago. And he did whatever he was doing, and I did whatever I was doing. And then we reconnected 5 years ago, and we've had a wonderful time together and see each other every 6 weeks for lunch or dinner. And he looks good and has good recall. And we have a lot of fun talking about kind of crazy things you and I are talking about.
Crazy for sure. Did you ever think that Boston could have been, I mean, obviously you weren't involved, but that could have been a decent WFL challenger football market if you were able to have found an owner who maybe wanted to take a crack at that market? Or do you think it would have been just as difficult as, say, New York was or some of the other markets?
Yeah, I think the WFL was it was, the only thing I could say is probably too close to the heels of the AFL. You just we think there was a long gap of time between the merger of the AFL and the WFL, but it wasn't. So I just think it was ill-conceived plan. That's all.
That's a very good point. I guess I was groping there for Boston, and it always having been, not unlike New York in certain cases, in certain times of history, a challenging market for facilities. Like for stadia and that kind of stuff, right? Yeah,
you're 100% right on that. Look, all of New England, there's one real major league arena right now in all of New England, the Boston Garden. Hartford, the building is really old. You could argue that it could be brought up to snuff, but it would be mighty hard, which is kind of strange, isn't it? Because New England's a pretty big territory.
Well, and you contrast that to the New York metropolitan area, obviously larger, but still, I think we're going on now our 6th or 7th major indoor arena. And it depends on whether you look at the old Izod Center, which is still there, but, kind of mothballed. But I mean, the new arena built purposely for the Islanders, I think, if I'm on the concert business, or there's a lot of space and a lot of dates that have to get filled now with all those arenas there, right?
Stop and think about it. there are 3 NHL teams within 7.5 miles of each other. You know, that's pretty amazing.
For sure. All right, so let's go back to hockey then, since you brought it up. I want to get into the intrigue around. I guess there's really no other way to put it, and all roads lead to you. So this is why I bring it up. So, in no particular order, the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Minnesota North Stars, and the San Jose Sharks. And frankly, you know, to the astute historian or just even the passing fan, I think, of hockey, who was aware of any of those teams, right? Obviously, 2 of them still around. I'm not sure it's obvious that this somewhat complicated relationship among the 3 exists. And without each of them, we wouldn't have the Sharks in San Jose and maybe even the Pittsburgh Penguins today. Is that a fair statement?
You know, it actually is. And not many people quite clue into that. And good for you. But
where do I cash my check?
Well, the fact is, when we left the Whalers, and we had no choice, the corporate community made the decision to sell it, which was their right. And our piece of the ownership as the founders was small. And the people that bought it were individuals, and they wanted to run it themselves. They didn't want me. So, you know, there's no other team in Hartford. So, and we had started in the film business, and my wife was acting. And so we elected to pull up stakes, go to LA, which we did. And we quickly within about 4 months, got a call from John Ziegler and said, we're going to expand, and we want to establish a benchmark fee of $50 million. And we know you love the sport, so maybe you could find a place. And so we did. We went up and down the coast, San Diego, we went to Sacramento, we went to San Fran. We never really even thought of San Jose until we got a call from a young lawyer there, Jim Hager. Said, look, I've read in the papers you're looking for a place for an NHL team. You have to come to San Jose. And so we did. We flew in there, met with the mayor, Tom McHenry, met with Jim, and saw the building that was not complete, but just about, and just said, this place is another Hartford with bigger and more money. I mean, and so we jumped at it. It's probably the only deal that I'm sad about that we weren't able to do. I mean, we did it, but we couldn't keep it. We put the deal together, and then Gordy and George Gund, who own Minnesota, were failing in Minnesota. And they said, well, we're in the league, Howard isn't. We want San Jose. And so one thing led to another. And we swapped Minnesota for San Jose. But legally and technically, we're the first owners of San Jose. When we actually, my wife Karen and I joke about it, but we went to Chicago for the closing, and we went all the way down one end of the conference room table, and we signed as owners of the San Jose Shark. And now if I had had a heart attack at that end of the table, they'd have had a hell of a mess on their hand, but I didn't. And then we went down the other end of the table and signed it over to the Guns, and we ended up with Minnesota. And Minnesota is a great place. So I really want to be clear on that, but it's not where we really wanted to be. And you know, it didn't fit in with our film business and what Karen was doing. So we left and came back to LA.
And how do the Penguins figure into all of this? Because your ownership was pronounced there too.
What happened there was, again, within about 4 or 5 months, I got a call from a chap named Tony Liberati, who had heard that we had done a deal or two. And he said, I'd like to meet with you and see if you might help me on a very confidential basis find a buyer for the Penguins, because the economy was turning a bit. And I guess Mr. DeBartolo Sr., who I dealt with, had to sell the team. And so he flew out. We met at the airport for an hour, shook hands on a deal. And then trying to help him get a buyer, the couple of people that we were talking to, you know, really, we're not being fair to him in the price. And so the suggestion was made, maybe you try to put the deal together. And so that's what we did. We put the deal together. It might have moved, is what I can tell. I can't tell you it would have moved, but it was at the risk of moving because it couldn't get a buyer. And we pulled
But the market, though, I mean, the fans, I mean, it's a pretty darn good market, no?
It's an outstanding market, you know. It's an outstanding market. But up until that point in time, it was an up and down market. Do you know what I mean, Tim? It had, you know, years and moments of very bad attendance. And a lot of times good markets are made bad by the ownership. Now, I'm not going to judge any other ownership, but, you know, with good ownership, and we left in the end of the 90s, Mario and Ron Burkle took it over, and that's your definition of really good ownership, because you have Ron Burkle, who has mighty deep pockets and is a good man, and Mario, who's an iconic figure in the marketplace. So between the two of them, they could do what we couldn't do.
Tell me about during your years in Pittsburgh, and this is a real deep dive, but the Red Army team. I maybe for our audience, if you can remind them what the CSKA Moscow, i.e. Red Army team, was about. And do I have this right, that there was kind of a joint venture between maybe the Penguins or maybe you separately as the owner or the overseer of the Penguins and this Red Army team? Or explain it to me, because it was clear that the Soviet versus America, the Soviet versus Canada thing, the Summit Series of 72, certainly in 74, there was a lot of that going on in the 70s. And I get the sense that was part of the marketing allure of maybe doing something like this.
What happened in the mid-90s, early 90s, as we all know from history, is that Russia became more capitalist in nature. And the walls were down, so players could come and go, they could leave. And so the Red Army team always had the edge. A lot of people don't realize, they were probably, if not the greatest team, one of the top 2-3 greatest teams for years in all of hockey, not just Russia. But when you had free enterprise, they no longer had the leverage of, if they saw a player like you or me or whoever that was a great young player and you were 2,000 miles away someplace, if they wanted you on your team, they drafted you in the Army. So you had no choice. So they had the pick of the litter. But when the walls came tumbling down and it became an open market, they lost their leverage and they needed partners. And they reached out to us, I guess, because they knew we kind of liked adventure, you know? And so they reached out to us through an intermediary, and we did a 50-50 deal with the Minister of Defense there. We still have it, actually, not that we can do anything with it. And so we went in there.
I'm sorry, where was the money going? I'm sure it wasn't going back to the office, maybe, right?
No. I mean, we actually put people over there to run it. They had no attendance. They could have cared less about attendance. But once it became free trade and you had to have revenues, then it became more important. So we put they did a documentary on it. You really ought to watch it, called Red Penguins.
Red Penguins. Absolutely would love to talk to the people who put that together.
Yeah. And they did it. It's not our film, but they did a marvelous job, and we're in it. And we really made it work good for 2 years.
Doing what? Bringing tours a la Harlem Globetrotters, that kind of thing?
We did a tour one season, but we really marketed the team the way you market over here. And you get sponsors. And remember, sponsors were lining up to try to come into Moscow then in Russia, because it was an open territory and it hadn't been open for years. We were well ahead of our time in this deal, but we were probably too far ahead of our time. And then it got dangerous. There's no other way to put it. And so we, for a few reasons, we made the decision to pull out.
So in essence, you were running a team that obviously, well, I guess the KHL hadn't been formed yet. It was another decade or so later. But whatever the leagues or league was in Russia, obviously itself going through convulsions as a country and whatnot. But you were essentially, I think what you're alluding to is almost like the soccer model that's evolving today, where you have a central organization that's running clubs in different leagues around the world, and that indeed is ahead of its time, and probably is going to come to hockey at some point too, if not following the footsteps of professional international soccer.
Yeah, I mean, the team then played other Russian teams. I mean, there was a Dynamo team, which is actually the KGB team. There's a team in St. Petersburg. There were a lot of teams over there, all over the country, and they love the sport. They love the sport, and they're great players. And people there, I mean, it's tough what those people there are going through now, but it's not them. It's the leadership that's doing this. But we looked upon the experience as a good one, but when it became unsafe, that's when we pulled the staff out of there. We said, okay, that's that.
And was that when you were your ownership of the Penguins, or was that separate and different?
No, it was me and Morris Belsberg and Tom Ruda, three of us.
But this was not at the same time you were the owners you were running the Penguins.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
So the question then is, how does the NHL handle that? Do they encourage that? Do they like that? Do they not like that?
Did the deal just because Gary was coming in the league. In fact, there's a great picture right in the wall of this living room of Gary and Victor Tikhonov and Gushin and Jeff Pash, Gary Bettman, and myself and my wife, just when we had the initial press conference. I think they had no objections to it. And actually, after the first year when we were doing well, a couple of the other owners, George Gund and I think Mike Illich, started to say, maybe we'll do the same thing. But then they changed their tune, you know.
This is all fascinating, but you're, I mean, clearly, you keep coming at you're a hockey guy at heart, it seems, right? Either with your head and your heart, right? And I guess yeah. So, I mean, did you ever in your years, and obviously your entertainment business as well, of course, but did you ever entertain, aside from that WFL ideation, any other sports that you felt you could leverage, or was hockey really it and that was your lane?
But I do the hockey, and I still love the people in it, though it's all different than when I was there, mind you. Though very close to Gary and Bill Daly and some of the people there. They're wonderful people running the league. They've done an amazing job. But when I'm out of that game now, we're firmly ensconced in film, and we're, you know, we loved it while we did it, but now we're in a different chapter. But we keep our little toe in the water over there.
All right. So two questions then that maybe can sort of round our conversation this time. That's
Sure.
a hint. That's a hint that maybe I'll drag you into it some other time. But
Anytime.
Be careful what you ask for. But I mean, it's clear that you have more than a toe dip in hockey, at least over the last number of years. The first question is around what you think the future of the sport is, and let me sort of seed it with what is now known as the Premier Hockey Federation, the former National Women's Hockey League, right? I, like a lot of sports on the pro level, finally, and very interestingly, almost, you know, complete greenfield, it seems, for women at a high level and a sustained level in professional sports, hockey being among them. And you were part of getting one of those franchises that still exists today in that league up and running.
Well, I'm not sure about that. We never had a franchise in the.
I think you licensed the name though, right, or something.
Oh yeah,
okay.
yeah. We let the Connecticut girls use the name gladly, but I'm all for it. I think it's just wonderful. When I had the Whalers, my daughter was the only team on an all boys prep school team. She was the only girl who played left wing, and she's pretty good. So I just love the fact that she played and competed, and now if she were at the same place, she'd have a team of all girls, and I think it's great. And I enjoy watching the women's hockey and whenever it's on TV, and I think they're great fun to watch. They do great.
Yeah, and certainly the success on the Olympics level too certainly doesn't hurt. But what do you think the future of the pro version of the sport is, female and male? I mean, we regularly take pot shots at the NHL for some of the franchises that and some of the doings, and the Arizona Coyotes are probably first among them, right? Given it just seems like a strong desire by the commissioner to, through hell or high water, keep a franchise in that market, despite all the, seemingly insurmountable obstacles in terms of facility and whatnot against it. But how strong do you feel hockey is right now? And, could you ever imagine it being what it is today? And perhaps is it getting too big and too corporate and too commercial and all of that? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's getting too big or too commercial. I think the way Gary and his administration have grown the sport is fantastic. And you have to remember, any league, you got 32 teams in it. Look, you in the NFL, you had like 3 franchise moves the last 3 years. You had San Diego go to LA, you had another team, Oakland, go to Vegas. And I've heard maybe there'll be maybe a team will expand. Well, they'll make moves in every league. It's just going to happen. And they're as good as it sounds. And I agree. You look at Phoenix and you say, well, it's definitely had a rocky history, but it should work there. And I think if they can ever get the building situation the way they want to, and a good competitive team, there's no reason why it shouldn't work there. There's a great saying I have. You may edit me out, okay? But the saying is, the grass is always greener until you smoke it. So you say, well, Phoenix ought to be in where? Kansas City. How the hell do you know that'll work? You don't.
Yeah, or Houston or Quebec.
Or Houston. And, you talk about Houston. Houston's got 3 other venues and 3 other teams. It's tough now because you want your own venue. So I don't know. I mean, it's the NHL and Gary, and you also want to do everything you can for the fans that do support. You want to do everything you can to try to keep it there, because that shows the other teams in the league that you remain loyal to the team and will remain loyal to you. And so it's a tough situation. I think the league from top to bottom is really solid in the NHL, and frankly, all 4 leagues right now are really solid, and the values have gone up dramatically, and that's healthy.
Would you have envisioned the relatively quick success of both Las Vegas and Seattle that's occurred?
Seattle, yes. It's a border. I call that a border city. They're up in the northwest corner. They're close to Vancouver. There's a hockey heritage there from the old Pacific Coast League. So yes, and we thought Vegas would do well. I never knew they'd do this well. But Seattle, yes, for sure.
I guess the question that was in that question that wasn't sort of obvious is, and this is where the cynicism, for me at least, comes in. You're obviously more of the pro and has more the knowledge of how things really work. It's the eternal and seemingly growing tension between governments and subsidies for ever increasingly large and expensive facilities. And you wonder when that sort of potentially cracks. And you see a couple of signs of sort of pushback from governments and tax funded whatevers to entice. But I don't know. There's a point at which you wonder how many of these palaces, indoor and outdoor, can continue without sort of something, I don't know, going awry, because there certainly has been a big boom in construction, but I think it seems to be an increasing concern in certain communities about how much they're willing to fund these essentially private entities.
I guess there is, but I can tell you, ask Hartford how they feel about losing the team and the damage losing that team has done to that city and that area. And they would have had that team today if they didn't get stubborn over, look at $3 or $4 million a year is a ton of money for you and me. But in the overall scheme of things, to be able to say you still had your major league team and the economic impact a team has on a city and a region is dramatic. It really is dramatic. And when people do their homework, and we've done it, and I haven't done it, Tim, because I haven't had to do it in about 25 years, okay? But when you do it, you
just
realize,
throw 3 zeros on every number that you're looking at then.
When you realize the value that a team brings to a marketplace, it's immense. And that's in dollars and cents. And then you have the spiritual value. I mean, I remember my corporate partners, and we would talk about how great it was for them to look at the newspaper and look at the NHL standings and be able to see Hartford there. And for the people in the area and the region, and as an enticement to get young executives to come and work in the marketplace. So when people get a little upset with government for doing everything they can to keep a team there, really scratch below the surface and see what is the value of a team, because it's immense. And if you're going to lose it, boy, you better really think through all the ramifications of losing it, making sure it isn't a stubborn owner or a stubborn governor, which is exactly what happened in Hartford.
Yeah, it's that halo of quote unquote major league status, right? We've seen it from the earliest days of expansion in baseball, right? It's a Minnesota getting a franchise from Washington, D.C. I mean, it connotes major league status, literally and figuratively. And but the price to pay, right? And I think it's just very interesting. Maybe it's more coverage. Maybe it becomes the dollars just to get so much larger. I do think there's a real. You also have to look at the economics of it too, and obviously we're in inflationary times, so maybe not the best example of it. But the cost of going to a game, right, is already far outpacing the average person's ability to go to a game, whether it's an NHL game or NFL game or whatever, to go to these palaces, and yet they're also paying the taxes for these facilities that maybe they can't afford to go to, which doesn't seem to sort of sit square with a lot of people. But, I hear that argument.
And I hear that, and I get that. And if the cost gets unbearable, it'll show in the attendance. And then that'll get people to say, maybe we got to do things a little differently here, folks. But right now, that hasn't happened. Right now, you go to these games there. I go to it. I don't go to many anymore because we're out in Palm Springs here. But I'll go a couple of times. My wife and I will go to like the Kings game and see old friends. And I look around that arena and I see the price of tickets. Everybody's got a jersey and a hat. And I say, and most of them are really young. I say, how the heck do they afford it? And at some point, when it starts to price itself out, then the market was going to have to adjust.
Yeah. I mean, could you ever have imagined back when you were, fledgling in the WHA and just the power and the lucrative nature of things like season tickets or logos or merch, right? Obviously it was part of the mix, right? But I mean, it's Fanatics, right? The company that's behind all the merchandise for all these leagues now, right? It's a multi-billion-dollar valuation company, and it's for merch, right? And t-shirt, and by the way, expensive merch.
No question.
Yeah, I mean, those aren't little simple promotional items anymore. They're big business, arguably keeping, as a huge revenue stream as part of the overall mixture. Real estate, right? Owning not only your own arena, but like if you look at baseball and even MLS soccer and some of these others, it's all about like the acreage around the facility so that they can somewhat diversify with some mixed use stuff, so that in the off season there are revenue streams real estate wise versus just the attendance at the games. Interesting stuff. I mean,
it's good fun stuff. You're 100% right.
All right. So here's the last question then. So in your not so new life in the world of entertainment and films and all that kind of stuff, are there, I mean, you mentioned the documentary about the Red Army team, Red Penguins. I know you were interviewed for, but you were producing that. Do you feel that there are any stories from your your past sports executive life, shall we say, that either you or others should bring to life? It's a loaded question. I've got a couple of suggestions. And or do you even fancy getting involved in telling some of those stories, which I'm sure are crazy?
We're right now, we have 2 shows we're doing. One is the birth of the Whalers, and the WHA is a limited series.
Really?
Yeah. And if
we're
you want to
breaking news here on this show. Unbelievable.
Well, if you go to the Hockey News, we're working with the Hockey News on a few things, but if you go, you can hear the podcast. It's called Slim and None, and you can get the episodes. We're up to about, I think tomorrow the 7th one comes out. And then we'll do a limited series on that. And then the other one we're doing is on the Red Penguins. We've obviously had to slow it down because of what's going on in Russia, but we will tell that story as well. And
so those are audio and podcast only, not video or
no, the Red Penguins, we're just developing it. The Slim and None, the one on the birth of the Whalers and WHA's podcast right now, but it's going to be limited series. Right now it's podcast.
Fantastic. And as you're thinking about those ideas, I mean, any others you're ideating, but maybe you haven't put pen to paper yet?
We're doing a Urban Mighty Ducks. We're very close to having it financed. That'll be a movie, and we're just putting that together now. We hope to shoot that movie in the fall, and it's really an Urban Mighty Ducks. It's great fun. It's really great fun.
Very interesting. And then I guess the sort of the more creative question is, what do you and your wife and others involved in your efforts, whether it's around sports stuff or not? I mean, are you more intrigued by and or jazzed by nonfiction documentary style storytelling, or do you rather enjoy having the creative liberties of doing more, say, fictional or fiction adjacent storytelling?
Oh, we've done both. We haven't done documentary, but we've done IP that is like, well, we did the movie Ray, and that was based on Ray Charles.
Absolutely.
Obviously, we've done movies that are based on books, and then we've done pure fiction. The stories we gravitate to are stories that are the triumph of the human spirit. That's what we like the most. Stories that are triumph of the human spirit. I think we need more, and we've kind of done a little bit of everything. But I think, particularly in today's world, you need feel-good stories that make you feel good. So we try to do that. They're a little harder to do. That's what we strive for.
And do you miss anything from your sports life at all, or are you just happy to have been there at the founding of some of these things versus what it is today?
I listen, I miss a lot. They're wonderful people. Just so I have nothing but fond memories. When you get to the playoffs, my competitive juices kick in, and I say, God, it'd be kind of fun to have a team that's going to go in and hopefully kick the ass of another team. But beyond that, I don't miss it. I couldn't possibly run a team in today's world. It's complicated, a much bigger business. And I'm way better served watching the games with my wife, Karen, and enjoying them.
It does sound like it might have been a lot more fun back in the day, though.
Back in the day, I can assure you. One day we'll do a show, and maybe a little off color, but you'll have a few laughs.
I love that conversation. I could have had at least another hour or two, and I suspect you agree. And we look forward to having Howard back to go into further minutia and nooks and crannies of his still unfolding story, and lots of great inventive stuff in the hopper from Baldwin Entertainment with Howard and his wife, but also in the realm of sports, as now out there in the ether too. So, for example, you must get the book. That's called Slim and None, My Wild Ride from the WHA to the NHL and all the way to Hollywood. That is available wherever good books are found, and you will find a convenient link to it, of course, on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 259. My goodness. And you will give us some referral love when you buy one or many copies of said book. It's a wonderful read. It's fun. It's got lots of great anecdotes. If you're too busy to read, or just frankly too lazy to, or you'd like a compliment, that's the word I'm looking for, to that book, how about the podcast that's out now? I think it's up to episode number 7, so it's drizzling out every couple of weeks. It's called Slim and None. Now you can find that podcast wherever fine podcasts are found, wherever you get this one, for example. Just search up Slim and None, and it's great. It's Howard's direct reminiscences of stuff, and it's 7 episodes deep thus far, and it's great. If you love this conversation and our episode number 100 conversation, our first one with Howard, you will love that podcast as well. How about the movie that Howard features prominently in, about that story about the Red Army hockey team called Red Penguins? It came out in 2020. We'll have a convenient link to that too, but you can see that on Amazon Prime. You can buy the DVD. We'll have links to all that stuff wherever good films are found. But if you want to stream it, it is rentable on Prime Video. And again, we'll have that link for you on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. That is a hoot and then some. And again, it's called Red Penguins. I don't know how much more I can promote for Howard, but there's plenty more stuff I'm sure to come, and I'm sure I've missed. But I do appreciate you listening this far. And let's see, what else? How about you want to follow us? By all means, we're on, of course, our website. Again, goodseatsstillavailable.com. That's sort of the locus for everything. All of our episodes and stuff are found there. You can share them and stream them there. Of course, the best way to make sure that you get every single episode, and when it's seconds after it's dropped out there in podcast land, is to subscribe or follow us. Wherever you get your podcasts, make sure you find us and put us in there so you don't miss a single episode. Our website obviously is got lots of great imagery and all that other kinds of stuff, links to all of our books and various media and stuff. You can follow us on any of the major social platforms, probably most aggressively on Twitter, as long as, until maybe Elon Musk takes it over. We'll see. But at Good Seats Still, that's where you'll find us on Twitter. You'll find us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available, and you will find us on Facebook as well at Good Seats Still Available. Email, feel free to send us some email. Go ahead. We're at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. Pretty simple. And yes, we have a little weekly email newsletter. Just find the link on their website there, and you can subscribe to that too. And what else? Our pal Jerry Payne. Thank you, sir, for your knob twiddling this week, as always. And I don't know. I guess that's it. Let's see you next week, okay, with more fun and frivolity coming up. Take care. And until then, next week, we will see you. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.